I never loved you. Those 4 words that he confessed to me exactly 13 months ago are the same words I whispered to myself as I signed my marriage certificate with his brother's name beside mine. The memory of that night still burns through me like acid in my veins. I can feel it all over again, the way my world tilted sideways when Marcus looked me dead in the eyes, his face cold as winter stone, and delivered those words like they were nothing more than a weather report. 3 years together. 3 years of my life poured into what I thought was our future, our love, our everything. I remember how my hands started shaking first. Not the dramatic trembling you see in movies, but this small, almost imperceptible vibration that started in my fingertips and spread up my arms like electricity gone wrong. The restaurant around us didn't disappear. That's another movie lie. Instead, every sound became amplified. The clink of silverware on plates, the soft murmur of conversations from other tables, the gentle jazz music that suddenly felt like it was mocking me. He just sat there, cutting his steak with mechanical precision, like he hadn't just detonated a bomb in the center of my chest. I watched his hands, those same hands that had held mine, that had traced patterns on my skin in the dark, that had slipped an engagement ring onto my finger just 6 months earlier, and they were steady, completely, utterly steady. The engagement ring felt like it was burning my finger. I kept twisting it, this nervous habit I'd developed, but now it felt foreign, heavy, like it belonged to someone else. I think I said something. My mouth moved anyway. Maybe I asked him why, or how long, or when he knew. The details blur together in this haze of shock and disbelief. But his answer, his answer is crystal clear in my memory. He set down his knife and fork, dabbed at his mouth with his napkin like we were discussing the weather, and said it was nothing I did wrong. That he'd tried to love me the way I deserved, but he just couldn't force something that wasn't there. That he'd hoped the feelings would grow, especially when he proposed, but they never did. The proposal, I felt sick remembering it. The way he'd seemed nervous, which I'd thought was sweet. The way he'd stumbled over his words, which I'd attributed to romance and emotion. Now I realized it was guilt. Pure, undiluted guilt. I excused myself to the bathroom, and I don't remember walking there, but suddenly I was gripping the marble countertop, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked exactly the same as it had 2 hours earlier when I'd been getting ready for what I thought was just another dinner date. Same dark hair, same brown eyes, same everything. But inside, everything had been hollowed out and scraped clean. That's when the real crying started. Not the pretty, delicate tears that leave your makeup intact. The ugly, soul-deep sobbing that comes from somewhere primal and desperate. I pressed paper towels against my face and tried to pull myself together, but my reflection looked like a stranger. A woman who'd been played for a fool for 3 years. When I returned to the table, Marcus was scrolling through his phone, not even pretending to be concerned about how I was handling the news that our entire relationship had been a lie. He looked up when I sat down, and there was something in his expression. Relief, maybe? Like he was glad to have it over with. The rest of dinner was a blur of mechanical movements. I pushed food around my plate while my mind raced in circles, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. He kept talking, explaining his reasoning like he was giving a presentation. Something about how he thought it was better to be honest now than to continue living a lie. How he respected me too much to keep pretending. Respect. That word tasted like poison in my mouth. The drive home was silent except for the sound of my heart hammering against my ribs. He offered to drop me off first, another small mercy that felt like salt in an open wound. When he pulled up to my apartment, I sat there for a moment, my hand on the door handle, waiting for him to say something. Anything. An apology, maybe, or some acknowledgement of what he'd just destroyed. Instead, he cleared his throat and asked if I wanted him to help me move my things out of his place over the weekend. That's when something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped, like a rubber band stretched past its limit. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for the first time in 3 years. The weak chin that I'd found endearing. The way he avoided eye contact when things got difficult. The complete absence of any real emotion in his expression. I got out of the car without saying a word. The next few days passed in a fog of numbness and rage that alternated like waves. I called in sick to work, which wasn't even a lie. I was sick. Sick to my stomach, sick at heart, sick of being such a complete fool. I lay in bed and replayed every moment of our relationship, looking for signs I'd missed. And God, there were so many. The way he never seemed fully present during intimate moments. How he'd suggested we wait to set a wedding date until after he got his promotion at work. The times he'd seemed almost annoyed when I'd talk about our future together. All those little moments that I'd explained away or ignored completely. My sister Emma came over on the third day, armed with ice cream and fury on my behalf. She'd never liked Marcus, something she'd kept mostly to herself, but had let slip a few times when she'd had too much wine. Now she was vindicated, and she wasn't shy about expressing her opinion of him. But it was something she said while we were eating cookie dough straight from the container that planted the first seed of what would eventually become my plan. She mentioned that she'd seen Marcus's older brother Daniel at the coffee shop near her office. They'd talked briefly, and apparently he'd just moved back to town after finishing his residency in Chicago. He was starting work at the hospital and looking for a place to rent. Daniel. I'd met him exactly twice in 3 years, once at a family barbecue early in my relationship with Marcus, and once at Christmas dinner last year. Both times he'd been polite but distant, which I'd attributed to him being busy with medical school and residency. Marcus had always been oddly competitive when it came to his older brother, making little comments about Daniel's achievements that seemed designed to diminish them somehow. But I remembered Daniel being different from Marcus in every way that mattered. Taller, broader, with the kind of quiet confidence that Marcus had always tried to fake. Dark hair like Marcus, but with these striking gray eyes that seemed to actually see you when he looked at you. And there had been something else, a warmth that Marcus had never possessed, even in our best moments. Emma kept talking, but my mind was elsewhere, turning over possibilities like stones in my hand. Marcus had humiliated me, discarded 3 years of my life like they meant nothing. He'd made me feel worthless, unlovable, disposable. What if I could return the favor? The idea was so clear and perfect that it took my breath away. Marcus, who'd always felt inferior to his successful older brother. Marcus, who'd tried so hard to compete with Daniel's achievements and had always come up short. What would it do to him to watch his brother choose me? To see Daniel give me everything Marcus had withheld? It wasn't just about revenge, though that was certainly part of it. It was about proving something to myself. That I was worthy of real love, not the pale imitation Marcus had offered me. That I deserved someone who would choose me completely, not someone who had to force himself to stay. The more I thought about it, the more perfect it seemed. Daniel was everything Marcus wasn't. Successful, accomplished, genuinely kind from what I remembered. If I could make Daniel fall for me, really fall for me, it would be the ultimate proof that Marcus had been wrong about me. That the problem hadn't been me at all. But it had to be real. I couldn't fake my way into Daniel's heart the way Marcus had apparently faked his way into mine, which meant I had to become someone worthy of Daniel's attention, someone who could capture and hold the interest of a man who had everything going for him. I started planning that night, lying awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling and mapping out every detail. First, I needed to reinvent myself. Not in some dramatic, over-the-top way that would seem desperate or obvious, but subtly. I needed to become the best version of myself, the version that Marcus had clearly never seen or appreciated. I rejoined the gym I'd let lapse during my relationship with Marcus, not to change my body for Daniel, but to rebuild my confidence, to remember what it felt like to be strong. I threw myself into work with a focus I hadn't felt in years, staying late to tackle projects I'd been putting off, volunteering for assignments that would challenge me. The breakup became public knowledge, of course. Marcus and I moved in overlapping social circles, and people noticed when we stopped appearing together. I kept my responses brief and dignified when people asked what happened. It just wasn't working out, I'd say, which was true enough. No need to air all the humiliating details. Marcus apparently was less discreet. Emma reported back that he'd been telling people we'd grown apart, and that the breakup was mutual. The fact that he was rewriting history to make himself look better shouldn't have surprised me, but it still sent a fresh wave of anger through my system. 2 weeks after the breakup, I engineered my first accidental encounter with Daniel. Emma had mentioned he was looking for an apartment, and I knew from her description of their conversation that he'd been checking out places in the downtown area. There was a coffee shop on 5th Street that was popular with young professionals, the kind of place someone apartment hunting would likely stop for caffeine and Wi-Fi. I started going there every morning before work, always with a book or my laptop, looking busy and approachable but not desperate. On the 4th day, Daniel walked in. He looked different than I remembered. Older, more settled. The extra years of medical training had added a seriousness to his bearing that was incredibly attractive. He was wearing dark jeans and a gray sweater that brought out his eyes, and when he smiled at the barista, I felt something flutter in my chest that I hadn't experienced in years. Real attraction. Not the comfortable familiarity I'd felt with Marcus, but actual electric chemistry. He ordered his coffee and was turning to leave when he spotted me. I looked up from my book at exactly the right moment, letting surprise and recognition cross my face naturally. Sarah? He approached my table with that same careful smile I remembered. I thought that was you. My heart was racing, but I kept my voice calm and friendly. Daniel! What are you doing in town? We talked for 15 minutes. He explained about finishing his residency, his new position at the hospital, his apartment search. I told him about my job at the marketing firm, keeping things light and positive. I didn't mention Marcus at all, and neither did he, though there was a moment when his expression grew slightly cautious, like he was wondering if he should bring up the elephant in the room. When he had to leave for a meeting with a potential landlord, he hesitated at my table. It was really good to see you, Sarah. Maybe we could grab coffee again sometime? I don't know many people in town anymore. I gave him my number, and he texted me that afternoon. Over the next few weeks, we fell into an easy pattern of coffee dates and casual conversation. Daniel was everything I'd remembered and more. He listened when I talked, asked thoughtful questions, remembered details from previous conversations. He had this way of making me feel like the most interesting person in the room, not through flattery or obvious charm, but through genuine attention and engagement. The contrast with Marcus was stark and painful. I started to realize how much of myself I'd suppressed during my relationship with him, how I'd learned to minimize my own thoughts and feelings to avoid his subtle dismissals. Daniel encouraged me to share my opinions, laughed at my jokes, showed real interest in my work and my goals. It took a month before he kissed me. We were walking through the park after dinner, and he'd been telling me about a particularly difficult case at the hospital. The way he talked about his patients with such genuine care and concern made my chest tight with emotion. When he stopped talking and looked down at me, I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen in Marcus's. Want. Real, undisguised want. The kiss was soft at first, almost hesitant, but when I kissed him back, it deepened into something that made my knees weak. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine and whispered my name like it was something precious. That night, I lay awake thinking about the kiss, but also about something else. Somewhere along the way, this had stopped being just about revenge against Marcus. I was genuinely falling for Daniel, and the realization terrified me. What if he found out about my initial motivations? What if Marcus told him about our breakup, about how I'd been engaged to his brother just 2 months before I started dating Daniel? Would Daniel think I was using him, even though my feelings had become completely real? I pushed the thoughts away. Marcus had kept our breakup vague when talking to mutual friends, and there was no reason he'd give Daniel all the details. As far as Daniel knew, Marcus and I had dated and broken up amicably some time ago. There was nothing suspicious about 2 adults moving on with their lives. Daniel and I became inseparable. He'd text me good morning every day and call me on his way home from the hospital. We spent weekends exploring the city, trying new restaurants, going to movies and art galleries. He introduced me to his friends from the hospital, and I could see the approval in their eyes when they looked at us together. More importantly, I could see the way Daniel looked at me, like he couldn't quite believe his luck, like I was something rare and precious that he was afraid to lose. It was everything I'd thought I had with Marcus, but real this time, genuine and deep and mutual. 3 months into our relationship, Daniel told me he loved me. We were cooking dinner in his apartment. He'd found a beautiful place in a converted warehouse downtown, and I was laughing at something he'd said when he went quiet. When I looked up, he was staring at me with such intensity that I felt my breath catch. "I love you," he said simply, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm completely crazy about you, Sarah." The words hit me like a physical force. This was what I'd been searching for with Marcus, what I'd thought we'd had but had been missing all along. Pure, uncomplicated love from someone who knew exactly how he felt and wasn't afraid to say it. "I love you too," I whispered back, and meant it with every fiber of my being. That night, making love with Daniel, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete connection, like we were 2 parts of the same whole finally finding each other. Afterward, lying in his arms, I understood for the first time what I'd been missing all those years with Marcus. This was what real love felt like. But even in my happiness, there was a shadow lurking in the back of my mind. Marcus still existed in the world, still had the power to complicate everything I was building with Daniel, and as our relationship deepened, I knew I'd have to face that reality eventually. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. Daniel and I had been together for 6 months when Marcus called him. Daniel told me about it afterward, his expression troubled in a way I'd rarely seen. Apparently, Marcus had heard through mutual friends that Daniel was seeing someone seriously. He'd called to ask if it was true, and when Daniel confirmed it, Marcus had asked who. Daniel had told him it was me. The silence on the other end of the phone had lasted so long that Daniel thought the call had dropped. When Marcus finally responded, his voice had been cold and strange. He'd said something about how interesting that was, and that they should all get together for dinner soon to catch up. Daniel had agreed, thinking it would be nice for his brother to get to know his girlfriend better, not understanding the minefield he was walking into. The dinner was scheduled for the following Saturday at an upscale restaurant downtown. As the date approached, my anxiety ratcheted higher and higher. This would be the first time I'd seen Marcus since that horrible night when he'd destroyed our relationship, and now I'd be sitting across from him holding hands with his brother. The revenge I'd originally planned was about to unfold, but it no longer felt like the victory I'd imagined. I was genuinely terrified that Marcus would find some way to ruin what Daniel and I had built together. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I changed outfits 3 times before settling on a black dress that made me feel confident and beautiful. Daniel picked me up with flowers, white roses, my favorites, and his smile when he saw me was so warm and loving that it steadied some of my nerves. "You look incredible," he said, kissing my cheek, "though you seem nervous." "Everything okay?" I'd been dreading this question. Daniel still didn't know the full extent of my history with Marcus, and I'd been putting off having that conversation. Now, with dinner just hours away, I knew I was running out of time. "I should probably tell you something about Marcus and me," I began, but Daniel's phone rang before I could continue. It was the hospital. Emergency surgery that couldn't wait. Daniel looked anguished as he explained that he'd have to reschedule dinner, but I felt a wave of relief so strong it was almost dizzying. "I'll call Marcus and explain," he said, already reaching for his keys again. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I know you were looking forward to this." I wasn't, but I nodded and told him not to worry about it. We'd reschedule when things calmed down at work. But Marcus apparently had other plans. He called me directly that evening while Daniel was still in surgery. I stared at his name on my phone screen for several rings before finally answering. "Hello, Marcus. Sarah." His voice was exactly as I remembered it, smooth, controlled, with an undercurrent of something that might have been amusement. "I hear you're dating my brother." "Yes, I am." "Interesting timing. How long after our breakup did you wait before making your move on Daniel? A week? 2? The accusation in his tone made my blood boil, but I kept my voice level. "I don't think that's any of your business." "Oh, but I think it is." There was definitely amusement now, like he was enjoying himself. "See, Daniel's a good guy. Honest, trusting, maybe a little naive when it comes to women with ulterior motives. I'd hate to see him get hurt by someone who's just using him to get back at me." My grip tightened on the phone. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Come on, Sarah. You expect me to believe it's just a coincidence that you ended up with my older brother? The successful doctor? The one I've been compared to my whole life?" His words hit too close to home, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Maybe I just have better taste than I used to." Marcus laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. "There's the Sarah I remember, always ready with a cutting remark when things don't go your way. What do you want, Marcus?" "I want to have dinner. The 3 of us, like Daniel suggested. I think it's time we all got to know each other better, don't you?" The threat in his voice was unmistakable. He was going to tell Daniel everything, about our engagement, about the timing of our breakup, about what he perceived as my calculated pursuit of his brother. He was going to destroy everything I'd built, just like he'd destroyed our relationship. "Fine," I said. "When?" "Tomorrow night. I'll text you the details." He hung up without saying goodbye, and I was left standing in my living room, shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. Everything I'd feared was about to happen. Marcus was going to poison Daniel against me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Unless I told Daniel the truth first. That thought kept me awake all night. Could I explain to Daniel how this had started without losing him? Could I make him understand that even though my initial interest in him had been partly motivated by revenge, my feelings had become completely real? By morning, I'd made my decision. I would tell Daniel everything before dinner, let him decide whether he still wanted to be with me knowing the whole truth. It was a risk, but it was better than letting Marcus control the narrative. I called Daniel as soon as I knew he'd be awake, but he sounded exhausted from the long surgery and a night on call. When I asked if we could meet for coffee before dinner, he said he needed to sleep for a few hours first, but that we could talk at the restaurant. That left me with an entire day to agonize over what I was going to say. The restaurant Marcus had chosen was painfully familiar, the same one where he'd delivered his devastating confession 8 months earlier. Whether this was intentional or just a coincidence, it felt like a cruel twist of fate. I arrived first, my stomach churning with anxiety. The hostess seated me at a table in the center of the dining room, and I immediately wished I'd asked for something more private. Whatever was about to happen, it would have an audience. Daniel arrived next, still looking tired but devastatingly handsome in a dark suit. He kissed me hello and sat down beside me, taking my hand automatically. The simple gesture made my heart ache with love and fear in equal measure. "You look pale," he said, studying my face with those sharp gray eyes. "Are you feeling all right? I need to tell you something," I began, but Marcus's arrival cut me off. He strode into the restaurant like he owned it, all confident swagger and expensive clothes. When he reached our table, he leaned down to kiss my cheek in a mockery of friendliness that made my skin crawl. "Sarah, you look lovely. And Danny, thanks for rearranging your schedule." Daniel had always hated being called Danny, and Marcus knew it. It was a small power play, a reminder of their childhood dynamic that set the tone for the entire evening. The first part of dinner was almost civilized. Marcus asked about Daniel's work, complimented the restaurant choice, made small talk about their parents. But I could see him watching me, waiting for his moment to strike. It came during the main course. "So, Sarah," Marcus said, cutting into his steak with deliberate precision, "I've been thinking about the timing of your relationship with Daniel. It's interesting how quickly you moved on after our breakup." Daniel looked between us, confusion creasing his forehead. "Breakup? I thought you two had just dated casually a while back." "Oh no," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false concern. "We were engaged, actually. For 6 months before she decided she'd rather be with you instead." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Daniel's face go through a series of expressions: confusion, shock, hurt, and finally, a kind of cold realization that made my heart stop. "Engaged?" Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. "She didn't tell you?" Marcus asked, feigning surprise. "How strange. I would have thought that was the kind of thing you'd mention to your new boyfriend." Daniel turned to look at me, and I saw my own destruction reflected in his eyes. "Is this true?" I wanted to explain, to tell him about Marcus's confession and how it had felt to be discarded like garbage. But with Marcus sitting there watching us like we were his personal entertainment, the words wouldn't come. "Yes," I whispered. Daniel pulled his hand away from mine like I'd burned him. "When?" "The breakup was about a month before we started seeing each other," Marcus supplied helpfully. "Although, if I'm being technical, I broke up with her. She didn't take it very well, did you, Sarah?" The cruelty in his tone was breathtaking. This was Marcus's revenge for my perceived betrayal, destroying my relationship with Daniel in the most humiliating way possible. "I think I need some air," Daniel said, standing abruptly. He walked away from the table without looking back, leaving me alone with Marcus for the first time in 8 months. The moment Daniel was out of earshot, Marcus's mask slipped completely. "Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" he asked, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied smile. "The timing was too perfect, Sarah. You were always transparent when you were plotting something." "You don't know anything," I said, but my voice was shaking. "I know you set out to seduce my brother to get back at me. I know you've been playing the part of the devoted girlfriend while secretly celebrating your revenge. And now Daniel knows it too. That's not how it happened, isn't it? You found out Daniel was back in town and saw your opportunity. The successful older brother who always made me feel inadequate. It must have seemed like perfect justice. He wasn't entirely wrong, and we both knew it. But what he didn't understand, what he was incapable of understanding, was that it had stopped being about him the moment I'd fallen in love with Daniel. "You're pathetic," I said, standing up. "You can't stand the thought that someone might actually want me, can you? That maybe the problem was never me at all." Marcus's smile faltered slightly. "The problem was that you were never enough, Sarah. Not for me and not for Daniel once he realizes what you really are." I left him sitting there and went to find Daniel. He was standing outside the restaurant, hands shoved deep in his pockets, staring out at the street. When he heard me approach, he didn't turn around. "How long were you engaged?" he asked. 6 months. "And when exactly did Marcus break up with you?" I closed my eyes, knowing how this would sound. "The night before I first ran into you at the coffee shop." Daniel's shoulders sagged. "So you'd been broken up for less than 24 hours when we met." "Daniel, please let me explain." "Explain what?" He finally turned to face me, and the pain in his eyes was devastating. "Explain how you used me to get back at my brother? How everything between us has been some elaborate revenge plot." "It wasn't like that. Not after the first few weeks anyway. What I feel for you is real, Daniel. What we have is real." "Is it?" "Because right now, I don't know what's real and what's been carefully orchestrated to hurt Marcus. The worst part was that I could see his point. From the outside, it looked exactly like what Marcus had described, a calculated seduction designed to wound his brother through me. "I love you," I said desperately. "Whatever my reasons were in the beginning, I love you now." "That's real." Daniel shook his head slowly. "I don't know if I can believe that, Sarah. I don't know if I can believe anything you've told me." He walked away, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk in my black dress, feeling more foolish and heartbroken than I had the night Marcus destroyed our engagement. The next few days were torture. Daniel didn't return my calls or respond to my texts. When I went to his apartment, he wasn't there, or at least he wasn't answering the door. I considered going to the hospital, but the thought of confronting him at work felt like harassment. Emma tried to comfort me, but there wasn't much she could say. I'd lied to Daniel by omission, and now I was paying the price for my deception. A week after the disastrous dinner, Daniel finally called. "We need to talk," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Can you meet me at the park?" I agreed immediately, hope fluttering in my chest despite everything. At least he was willing to have a conversation. He was waiting on the same bench where he'd first kissed me, and the irony wasn't lost on either of us. He looked tired and older, like he'd aged years in the past week. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble, "about us, about what Marcus said, about everything." I sat down beside him but left space between us, not wanting to crowd him when he was clearly still processing. "I understand why you didn't tell me about the engagement," he continued. "It's not exactly first date conversation. But the timing, Sarah, it makes everything look calculated." "I know how it looks. But Daniel, you have to believe me when I say that my feelings for you are genuine. Yes, I was hurt and angry when Marcus broke up with me. And yes, maybe part of me initially saw you as a way to prove something to myself. But that changed so quickly, and what we built together, that was real." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the pond where ducks were swimming in lazy circles. "Marcus called me yesterday," he said finally. My heart sank. "What did he say?" "He wanted to make sure I understood the full extent of your deception. He told me about the engagement, about how devastated you were when he ended things. He painted a picture of you as this vengeful ex-girlfriend who set out to seduce me purely to hurt him. And you believed him?" I didn't know what to believe. But then I remembered something. He turned to look at me directly for the first time since I'd arrived. "That first day we met at the coffee shop when I asked for your number. You seemed surprised, almost like you hadn't expected me to be interested. If you'd been planning to seduce me from the beginning, wouldn't you have been more prepared for that moment?" A small spark of hope ignited in my chest. "You noticed that?" "I notice everything about you, Sarah. That's the problem. I've been falling in love with you since that first conversation, and now I don't know how to separate what's real from what might have been manipulation." "It's all real," I said urgently. "Daniel, I swear to you, everything between us is real. The way I feel when you look at me, the way my heart races when you text me, the way I can't imagine my life without you, that's not something I could fake even if I wanted to. But it did start as revenge against Marcus. I could lie, minimize it, try to make it sound less calculated than it had been. But Daniel deserved the truth, even if it cost me everything." "Yes," I said quietly. "It started that way." I was so hurt and humiliated by what Marcus had done, and when Emma mentioned you were back in town, part of me saw an opportunity to make him feel some of what I'd felt. But Daniel, I need you to understand, the moment I got to know you, really know you, it stopped being about him at all. When that first real conversation we had, when you told me about why you chose medicine, the way you talked about your patients, about wanting to help people, I realized you were nothing like Marcus. You were better than him in every way that mattered, and I started falling for you as yourself, not as his brother." Daniel was quiet again, processing what I'd said. "I need time," he said eventually. "I need to figure out if I can trust you again, if we can build something real from here. How much time? I don't know. A few weeks, maybe longer? I need space to think without you there influencing my feelings. It wasn't the answer I'd hoped for, but it wasn't a complete rejection either. It was a chance, slim though it might be. Okay, I said. I'll wait. The next month was the longest of my life. I threw myself into work, spent time with friends, tried to rebuild the life I'd had before Daniel. But everything felt flat and colorless without him in it. I didn't hear from Marcus, which was almost worse than if he'd called to gloat. The silence suggested he was confident that his revelation had destroyed my relationship permanently. 3 weeks into our separation, I ran into Marcus at the grocery store. He was picking up wine in the same aisle where I was comparing pasta sauce labels, and when he saw me, his face lit up with smug satisfaction. "Sarah, how are you doing? You look..." He paused dramatically. "Well, you look like someone who's been dumped by 2 brothers. That has to sting." "Hello, Marcus. I heard Daniel's been staying late at the hospital a lot lately, throwing himself into work to avoid thinking about his lying ex-girlfriend, I'd imagine?" The casual cruelty in his voice made me want to slap him, but I kept my expression neutral. "If you'll excuse me, I have shopping to finish." "You know, I almost feel bad about how things turned out," he said, blocking my path slightly. "I mean, you really did seem to care about him by the end. It's too bad you couldn't be honest from the beginning." "The way you were honest with me for 3 years?" Marcus's smile faltered. "That was different." "Was it? You let me believe you loved me, let me plan a future with you, let me waste 3 years of my life on someone who was just going through the motions. At least I fell genuinely in love with Daniel. After setting out to use him for revenge. Yes, after that. But the love was real, Marcus. Something you wouldn't understand." I pushed past him and finished my shopping, but the encounter left me shaken. Seeing Marcus's satisfaction at my pain reminded me of why I'd wanted revenge in the first place, not just because he'd broken up with me, but because of the casual cruelty with which he'd done it. That night, I wrote Daniel a letter. Not a text or an email, but an actual letter on paper. I told him everything. About the night Marcus broke up with me, about the devastation I'd felt, about the initial plan for revenge. But I also told him about the moment I'd fallen for him, about how completely my feelings had changed, about the future I could see for us if he was willing to forgive me. I mailed it to his apartment and tried not to obsess over whether he'd read it. 2 days later, he called. "I got your letter," he said without preamble. And I want to see you. Can you meet me at my place tonight?" My heart hammered against my ribs as I agreed. This could go either way. He might be ready to try again, or he might want to end things in person. When I arrived at his apartment, Daniel opened the door immediately, like he'd been waiting by it. He looked better than he had at the park, less haggard, though there was still a wariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. His apartment looked exactly the same, but being there felt different now. Like I was visiting a place that had once been home but wasn't anymore. "Do you want some wine?" he asked. I nodded, needing something to do with my hands. He poured 2 glasses of red wine and handed me one, but neither of us drank. "I've been thinking about your letter," he said. "About everything you wrote. And I believe you. About falling in love with me, about your feelings being real. I can see it when I look at you, Sarah. You can't fake the way your whole face changes when you smile at me." Relief flooded through me so strongly that I had to sit down. "Daniel, but," he continued, and my heart sank again. "I need to know that this won't happen again. That you won't keep secrets from me, even if you think they'll hurt me. Never again," I promised. "I should have told you about Marcus from the beginning. I was scared you'd think less of me, but keeping it secret made everything worse." It did. "And Sarah, I need you to understand something else. What you did, using me to get back at Marcus initially, that hurt. Not just because you lied about it, but because it made me question everything between us. I know. I'm so sorry. I don't want to be anyone's revenge plot. If we're going to try this again, it has to be about us. Not about Marcus, not about proving anything to anyone else, just us. It is about us. It has been for months, Daniel. I don't care about Marcus anymore. I care about you. About us." He studied my face for a long moment, then set down his wine glass and moved closer to me on the couch. "I missed you," he said softly. "Even when I was furious with you, I missed you every single day. I missed you too. So much I could barely function." He reached out and touched my face, his thumb tracing along my cheekbone. "I love you, Sarah. That didn't change, even when I didn't trust you. I love you too, more than I've ever loved anyone." When he kissed me, it felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. All the fear and uncertainty of the past month melted away, replaced by the solid certainty of what we meant to each other. We made love that night with a desperation and tenderness that spoke to how close we'd come to losing everything. Afterward, lying in his arms, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since the night Marcus had called to arrange that disastrous dinner. "There's something else we need to discuss," Daniel said quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. "What?" "Marcus. He's still going to be part of my life, Sarah. He's my brother, and despite everything, I can't just cut him out completely." My stomach tightened. "I understand, but I also won't let him interfere with us again. What happened at that dinner, the way he ambushed you, the way he enjoyed watching you suffer, that was cruel and unnecessary. He was protecting you," I said, though the words tasted bitter. "No, he was punishing you. There's a difference. If he'd been genuinely concerned about me, he would have talked to me privately. Instead, he chose to humiliate you in public. The fact that Daniel could see Marcus's behavior for what it was, deliberate cruelty, meant more to me than he could know. I talked to him yesterday," Daniel continued. "I told him that if he wanted to maintain a relationship with me, he needed to treat you with respect, that I wouldn't tolerate any more games or manipulations." "How did he take that?" "About as well as you'd expect. He said I was making a mistake, that you'd hurt me again eventually. But he agreed to back off." I doubted Marcus would give up that easily, but I appreciated Daniel standing up for me. It was more than Marcus had ever done during our relationship. Over the next few months, Daniel and I rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. I told him things I'd never shared with anyone, about my childhood, my fears, my dreams for the future. He did the same, and slowly, we developed the kind of deep intimacy that I'd thought existed with Marcus, but had been an illusion. The difference was night and day. With Marcus, I'd always felt like I was performing some version of myself that I thought he wanted to see. With Daniel, I could be completely authentic, and he loved me more for it, not less. We did encounter Marcus occasionally at family gatherings, and true to his word, he was civil. But I could see the resentment simmering beneath his polite facade, and I knew he was just waiting for me to slip up, to prove his prediction that I'd hurt Daniel eventually. 8 months after we'd gotten back together, Daniel proposed. He did it at the same park where we'd had our painful conversation about trust, but this time he was down on one knee with a ring that took my breath away. Not because it was expensive or flashy, but because it was perfect. A simple solitaire diamond that caught the light beautifully. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, supporting you, and building something beautiful together. Will you marry me?" The tears came before I could answer, but I managed to nod and whisper yes before he slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, and I realized later that he must have had it sized based on the engagement ring from Marcus that he'd never seen but had somehow figured out. The attention to detail, the thoughtfulness of even that small gesture, reminded me once again how different Daniel was from his brother. We planned a small wedding for the following spring, just family and close friends in a beautiful garden venue outside the city. I'd dreamed of a big wedding when I was with Marcus, but with Daniel, all I wanted was to be married to him. The details felt less important than the commitment we were making. Marcus was invited, of course, as Daniel's brother. I'd expected him to decline or find some excuse, but he surprised me by accepting. When I expressed concern to Daniel about potential drama, he assured me that Marcus had promised to behave himself. "Besides," Daniel said, pulling me close, "let him come. Let him see how happy we are. Let him see what real love looks like." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with just enough breeze to keep the spring air from being too warm. I felt calm and radiant in a way I'd never experienced during my engagement to Marcus. There was no anxiety, no second-guessing, no wondering if I was making a mistake. Just pure joy and anticipation. My sister Emma was my maid of honor, and she helped me get ready in the bridal suite at the venue. As she fastened the buttons on my dress, a simple but elegant design that made me feel like the best version of myself, she met my eyes in the mirror. "You know," she said quietly, "I never saw you look this happy when you were with Marcus. Not even when he proposed." She was right. Even during what I'd thought were our best moments, there had always been an underlying tension with Marcus, a sense that I was trying too hard to be someone he could love. With Daniel, everything felt effortless and right. The ceremony was perfect. Daniel cried when he saw me walking down the aisle, and his vows were so beautiful and heartfelt that there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Daniel kissed me like I was the most precious thing in the world. During the reception, I caught sight of Marcus standing alone near the bar, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. For a moment, our eyes met across the room, and I saw something that might have been regret flicker across his face before he looked away. Later, during the dancing, he approached us as we swayed together to our first song as husband and wife. "Congratulations," he said stiffly to Daniel, then turned to me. "Sarah, you look beautiful. I hope you'll be very happy together." There was no sarcasm in his tone, no hidden barbs. He sounded genuinely sincere, and for the first time since our breakup, I felt something like pity for him. He was watching his brother marry the woman he'd thrown away, and I think he was finally beginning to understand what he'd lost. "Thank you, Marcus," I said graciously. "That means a lot." He nodded and walked away, and I never saw him look back. Daniel and I honeymooned in Italy, spending 2 weeks exploring ancient cities and eating incredible food and making love in beautiful hotel rooms overlooking the Mediterranean. It was magical in a way that my relationship with Marcus never had been, even during our best times. On our last night in Rome, as we sat on our hotel balcony sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset paint the city gold, Daniel took my hand and kissed my wedding ring. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" he asked. "If Marcus hadn't broken up with you when he did, if we'd never met at that coffee shop." I considered the question seriously. Sometimes. But I think we would have found each other eventually. Some connections are just meant to be. You really believe that? I do. Marcus breaking up with me was the best thing that ever happened to me, even though it didn't feel like it at the time. It freed me to find something real with you. Daniel smiled and pulled me closer. "I love you, Mrs. Thompson." "I love you too, Dr. Thompson." We sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. What had started as a plan for revenge had transformed into the deepest love I'd ever known. Marcus's cruelty had inadvertently led me to the person I was meant to spend my life with. A year later, as I write this, Daniel and I are expecting our first child. We found out last week, and when Daniel saw the positive pregnancy test, he picked me up and spun me around the kitchen, both of us laughing and crying at the same time. I think about Marcus sometimes, wonder if he's found someone who can love him the way he needs to be loved, or if he's still going through the motions the way he did with me. Part of me hopes he has found happiness, because I've learned that carrying anger only weighs you down. But mostly, I don't think about him at all. My life is too full of joy and love and the future Daniel and I are building together. We're looking at houses now, planning to move somewhere with a yard for our children to play in. Daniel talks about teaching them to ride bikes and taking them camping, and I can see it all so clearly, the life we're going to have together. The revenge I'd planned was supposed to hurt Marcus by showing him what he'd lost. In the end, I think it did, but not in the way I'd expected. He didn't lose me to his brother out of spite or calculation. He lost me because he'd never really had me in the first place, and Daniel did from the very beginning. That night at the restaurant, when Marcus confessed he'd never loved me, he thought he was destroying me. Instead, he set me free to find someone who would love me completely, genuinely, forever. The joke in the end was on him. And I'm not sorry about that at all.